Hello, welcome to our talk on what game UX can learn from product design. First, we'll give a bit of an introduction to ourselves. Noah, do you want to go first?
I can, yeah. I'm Noa Pallister Brown. I'm a UI UX artist at Adam Hawk Advance. I've been here for almost 3 years, but previously I worked at a product design agency focusing on UX, where we developed user experiences for all sorts of bespoke software and web apps, from city council websites to Amazon seller dashboards. So all kinds of stuff really.
Hi, I'm Sarah. I'm also a UI UX artist at Adam Hawk Advance, and I've experience across PC, console, and mobile. And before Adam Hawk, I was working at an accounting software company where I did the UX for their web and mobile products. So, a bit of an overview of our talk today. First, we'll talk a little bit about what exactly is product design and compare it a little to game UX. Then we'll dive into what we've learnt from product design, such as how to design for the human experience and how to design holistic systems. And then we'll talk a little bit about some practical tips that you can apply to your games.
Yeah, and at the very end of the presentation, there'll also be a reading list, a resource list, just for people who want to go away and learn a little more.
Yeah. So, our first topic, product design versus game UX. So, what exactly is product design, or digital product design specifically? It's the combination of research, design, and strategy to create a product that solves a problem or fills a market need. The example that I have here is Deliveroo. When I'm feeling hungry and I can't be bothered cooking, I just type the kind of food that I'm craving at the moment into the search bar, and then I'll get a whole list of restaurants and cafes to choose from.
Yeah, another example of a problem would be something maybe more data driven. You sell on Amazon, but the Amazon dashboard is very limited for sellers and hard to understand. There's software out there developed to help you track all your stats in terms of what you're selling and what your profit margins are. Problem solved by products can be extremely bespoke.
Good product design is all about placing the user at the center of the design process. From researching their current problems and their current experiences, brainstorming ideas that address their problems, rapidly prototyping, testing those prototypes and getting feedback from users, and delivering on the solution and continuing to improve on the product. Essentially, product design is about designing tools to help users achieve their goals as frictionlessly as possible. Likewise, games UX does incorporate similar steps in the design process, from research, ideation, prototyping, playtesting, and then releasing the game. In games, we also want to help players achieve their goals by designing information, menus, and systems to be understandable and intuitive. But the main difference is purpose. In games, we're not necessarily trying to get players to the end as quickly as possible. It's more likely want to try to create an engaging experience that immerses them throughout the whole journey. Games UX is a fairly new discipline, and that makes it difficult to navigate at times and to know what the best next steps are. In comparison, product design is very much well established, and there's a lot of tried and true processes that we think could carry over to games. And so that's what Noah will be talking about in the next section.
Yeah, the human experience. When we talk about designing a user experience, we're very much talking about people and how to design best around what they expect and what you need them to get to. Again, in terms of product, this is there are books upon books about how we utilize a lot of different methods to be true and great designers in this way. One of the biggest, most well-known of these is something we call usability heuristics. These are research-backed sort of pain points and parts of any design that can help improve your product and also your game experience. We used to do something at our agency called a heuristic evaluation, where we would go into a website or a web app, and we would, just go through the experience, and any problems that we would find, we would then sort of assign one of these heuristics, and that can help you identify how to best solve that problem. We won't talk about all of them today. There are 10 of them. We're just going to do a little bit of a whistle-stop tour on 5 of them, starting with visibility of system status. This is about providing players with feedback so they know what's going on, and that their actions have resulted in an effect, basically. This also helps with your accessibility. Audio cues, visual cues, and haptic feedback are all vital components in video games in terms of providing players with feedback. And you should be using multiple forms of feedback on any given action. We'll rarely see, just an audio cue or just a visual cue. They're usually paired together.
Yeah, and in this screenshot of Brawl Stars, you can see multiple forms of feedback on the screen. So you can see the health bar, the power up bar, the charging animations, the number of damage above the opponent, the number of brawlers left, and a sort of who hit who indicator on the top left corner. By looking at the screenshot, you can pretty much get a really good picture of how the game is going.
Yeah, it's just about, informing players that things are happening and they should be able to tell what those things are. And number 2 is consistency and standards. This is about using familiar terminology, recognizable navigation patterns, and controls that are consistent with your genre and your platform. We all want to do a Persona 5, but we have to balance our expectations. We have to understand what players expect, the information they want to see, and when they want to see it. Fighting games are a really good example of a genre that has really consistent, recognizable design patterns and information hierarchies. We all know where our health bars are going to be. Or, we know generally what our play area is, and we all understand that while hitboxes are different across different games, they exist, and they affect how we interact with the other player. We want to break rules a lot of the time, but it's really good to know where you really shouldn't be or can't afford to. And then number 3 is a personal bugbear of mine, is error prevention. We want to give players warnings, alert them for undoable actions when they can't turn back, or when they're going to do something that can't be undone without maybe reverting to a previous save. Ultimately, players hate when they feel like they've been misled or lied to. It reduces trust in the systems they have to interact with, and that can't be a relationship they have if they're going to have a positive experience with anything, really. Although what annoys me the most is if we can give an error a code name like current or grapefruit or light bulb or whatever, surely we can tell players if it's something they can fix or if it's out of their hands. Oftentimes players will have to go to the internet and they can look up an error and be told what that error is and how to fix it if they can. And I don't understand why we can't just say, you can't do anything about this, or you can do something about this, if we know what the error is. And then we have recognition rather than recall, or recognition over recall. This is about reducing cognitive load for individuals by making information visible in ways that they sort of recognize. This marries with consistency and standards, in that patterns that people already recognize help reduce their mental load, so they can engage with maybe more bespoke or unique systems that exist elsewhere in the game a little easier. Radial menus are a really good example of this. We see them in a lot of different games. First-person games usually have them, and third-person games as well do, for emotes or stickers and things like this. So they can be used for a lot of different needs, but we always understand how they work. And it's sort of why the Apex Legends ping is now used in many modern games. It's a really good system. People understand it solves a problem pretty painlessly on the player's behalf, and we'll probably be using that until someone comes up with something better.
Yeah, and on that note, if you look at the ping system screenshot we have on the right, you can see that the icons have the labels like the frag grenade. It's important to give your icons labels because although they might seem intuitive to you, your players come from many different backgrounds and they have different experiences, meaning that they'll have a different perspective from you. And so by including labels, you'll just improve accessibility overall and make it a lot easier for players to quickly understand the meanings.
Yeah, I think it also can help with things like screen readers as well to have the text. So yeah, again, a lot of these can be traced back to sort of accessibility. A lot of these are just about easing burdens. And then the last one we'll go over is flexibility and efficiency of use. It's about customization, shortcuts, accessibility. This can be really helpful when we're talking about complexity as a barrier. Customization can become a really interesting solution in games that are extremely complex because they need to be. Final Fantasy XIV screenshots always look different. You can see one here because the level of control players have over their HUD is absolutely huge. Everything can be moved. Everything can be made bigger or larger. There's no grid. They can put it wherever they want. Custom keybinds also fall under this heuristic, similarly to in MMOs where you can control the keybinds on absolutely everything and map it to MMO mouse and things like this, as well as the ability to change the colors of HUD elements. In Final Fantasy XIV, I have made all my party members' names pink. So I always know that pink, that's my party. Customization can be a huge undertaking, but it can be very worth it. And user research. We talk about this a lot in video games, UX circles. I rarely see it really done. But it is the research, it's the study of your target users, their needs, their pain points against what already exists, so that you have the ability to make changes that are informed, that best serve your users and your players. Information from research can be the most powerful tool you can use and have to justify your choices. Active product design is always testing new flows and journeys. They A/B test constantly in order to gather information. Obviously, I don't think A/B testing is something we'll ever really want to do in a live game. Not that we can't apply the principle earlier on in development. But either way, the information that products gather from these tests inform the choices they make in the future, so that they're always sort of staying ahead. So research, how? There are, a lot of, it's a big thing to ask. So, good research practices are really important when it comes to investing in the research. First and foremost, I would say go beyond your QA team. We love them, but they are not your audience. Their technical understanding and integrations into the systems and the designs make them not very effective player stand-ins. They know too much. We all know too much. Everyone working on the game knows too much about the game they're working on to really stand in for players, but we can tend to put the onus on QA to stand in for them when we can't be bothered to actually do the testing and we're not getting accurate feedback. Additionally, when you test, you need to know what you're testing and why. Have clear goals and outcomes for your playtests. You should always be trying to validate something and know the metrics that you are measuring and how they can, be turned into actionable feedback. Broad scale testing will be difficult to pull results from. It will be really unfocused, and the data pools you'll get will be huge and completely irrelevant to each other. You want to measure smaller parts of your journey with a very clear intention of finding out something specific. You want to know what your optimal outcome is, and so then that way you can know how to work towards it in the case that that has not been the result you get. And then there's qualitative versus quantitative data. Understand the types of data that you're getting from any kind of test and what results those can translate to. Observational versus statistical results can serve different purposes depending on what you want to find out. Sometimes we want something that isn't too scientific, that is very sort of emotional and at its core. So it really depends what it is you're trying to find out. And then there's writing the tests. They can be time consuming, but if you're going to invest in good research, you need a good test. And writing these, especially if you're doing some kind of questionnaire, is really important. And it's vital to the validity of the answers you get. You can weight your questions, positive or negative, if you're trying to sort of bring out those particular friction points. And sometimes it's worth asking the same question, but wording it differently in a different context to see if you can uncover a sort of more complex truth about a situation. When you're asking people questions in surveys, their first answer is very rarely the whole truth, which isn't a problem. But if there's something you're really keen on finding out, it's worth maybe trying to dig into that question more and asking it in a slightly different way to see if the answers line up. It can reveal some more interesting feelings and results about that. And then there are lots of different software you can use, pieces of software you can use in terms of research to group your findings. Dovetail is an amazing piece of software if you've ever used it. It's gorgeous and I love it and I miss it a lot. You can streamline large amounts of information, especially qualitative data. You can tag things, sort things. You always know what piece of information has come from what user. Which gives you a really nice overview about any individual's feelings. You can take that into account when you're analyzing these results. It can also help you identify outliers, which can be helpful when it comes to trying to summarize what you found. Sometimes you want to include outliers and sometimes you don't. So it's really important to be able to identify them and also their broader context. It can be a little complex, but good researchers, it's a trained skill, and you sort of want to invest in it. And then I've had enough talking. I'll pass over to Sarah to talk about holistic systems.
Yeah. The next section will be about how to design holistic systems. So as Noah talked about usability heuristics and research, those help keep the player at the center of your mind when you're designing smaller interactions, potentially. But how do these interactions fit together to form the bigger picture that is the whole game? And this is where holistic systems come in and where systems thinking comes in. So what exactly is systems thinking? It's the approach to problem solving which takes into account the overall system as well as its individual parts. In product design, it's seeing the big picture. Where does a person first encounter your product? When and where are they using your product? And when do they input information? And what parts of the product is that information flowing into? It's about understanding dependencies and how that impacts the user. Now, what exactly does this mean for games? Well, it's being aware that our design decisions impact so many other areas and have knock-on effects. A common misconception is that UX is just UI. UX actually also includes the audio, the art, the gameplay, narrative, even the business and strategic direction of the whole game in some cases. On the right, we have the example of Alien Isolation. Unfortunately, it's not a video, but if you do play the game, you'll see that it's a really good example of how audio design greatly impacts the player experience. When you're solving puzzles, the beeping of the device not only indicates the player's progress, but creates an intense sense of urgency and fear. The reason why we really want to emphasize this point is because when you're addressing like playtest feedback, it's very easy to pin the blame on UI when something is difficult to understand or is not gelling with the player. It's important to zoom out and consider all the different parts of the game that impact the player and potentially contribute to the problem so that you can pinpoint exactly what you need to solve.
Yeah, and it's also when we're talking about UX, it's really important to keep an open line of communication with all these departments, including engineering, because when we're designing solutions for things, we have to be aware of what's really even in the realm of possibility. We don't want to design something and hand it off only to find out a few weeks later that it's just not possible. So we really can't work in isolation.
For sure. I guess on that note, when you zoom out, consider the full end-to-end experience of the player. From the start to the end, what exactly will your player interact with, and what if they don't follow what you want them to do or they make a lot of mistakes? A common example of this is tutorials. It's a good idea to outline what happens if the player doesn't follow the instructions that you've laid out for them. For example, if they go backwards or they can't find the next checkpoint. You need to plan out how to guide the player back and how you encourage them towards the correct direction. In Breath of the Wild, they use character dialogue and ability unlocks to guide the player in the right direction during the initial stage. However, they don't punish the player if they go in an unintended direction. Honestly, the player can go fight the final boss if they're really determined to. However, the game is designed, or the tutorial stage is designed in such a way that the player themselves reaches the conclusion that the boss areas are a bit too difficult at the moment, and they usually end up exploring an easier area, which is usually the intended area.
Yeah, as a chronic tutorial skipper, this is always sort of fun for me to think about as a then designer. I know some games still have like codexes that go over all the tutorialization. I think Monster Hunter does this quite well. A sort of anecdotal experience about the fact that if you aren't doing this, you can end up putting this information in the hands of other players. Is when my husband got me into Destiny 2, he swore up and down to me that there was not a quit option in the menu. And I just sort of believed him for a while. He told me he Alt F4'd. There is. You hit escape and it says quit to desktop. He's an idiot and I'm blind. I don't really know how that managed to happen, but it does. And if people are relying on other people to get their information, the information they can get can be inaccurate and that can cause friction. Which is not entirely in your control, but it is something you can consider.
Yeah. And systems thinking also includes platform considerations. So with each platform, whether it's PC, console, a handheld, or mobile, the player will be in a different environmental context and mindset. For example, a PC player is most likely sitting at home with one or several monitors, usually not rushing to go anywhere, with a solid chunk of time to play your game. Versus a mobile player who usually has a small screen, they may be playing a game while waiting for the bus, and so they only have a really short amount of time to play. It's important to define your players and to understand how the game fits into their lives. This can help you know what information you need to prioritize for each platform. On the example on the right, Genshin Impact, you can see that the HUD layout has slightly changed due to these considerations. The top screenshot shows the console version, and you can see that they show the player's entire party, and they show all the button prompts. Versus in mobile, they've instead prioritized the mobile controls, and they've made a lot of the icons a lot bigger to make them more tappable for mobile users. Yeah. So kind of to wrap up this section, we want to share some exercises that product designers use in order to zoom out and consider the whole system. The first exercise is framing design challenges with how might we questions or how might we statements. So take this example. From research or playtests, you discover a player problem or a player problem. For example, the players aren't engaging with your social system as much as you would have liked or expected. Rather than quickly thinking of a solution like, let's slap on more UI, let's put a pip, the first solution that comes to mind, you can rephrase that problem as a how might we statement. For example, how might we encourage players to engage more with our party feature or social features? This opens up the statement and helps you phrase it in a way that creates a good foundation for ideation. It opens up the possibilities and, gives you that space to explore other solutions than the one you would have thought of first. And it's also really beneficial to include multiple departments in your ideation. For example, art, audio, code. They provide their own unique perspective, and they can think of solutions, or they might come up with solutions that you might have never thought of. Another exercise for ideation specifically is Crazy Eights. This is where you fold a piece of paper into 8 little rectangles, and then you set a timer for 8 minutes. For each minute, think of a new idea, whether that's sketching it out or writing it out as notes, as this forces you to go beyond the original solution that you might have thought of.
Yeah. There are different formats for the Crazy Eights. We used to do one at our agency, which was, I think, 5s. But the principle remains the same, is to get those first ideas out of your head and to try and think about the problem more broadly. You also don't have to do one for every minute. You don't know. So if you do Crazy Eights or you do 5s, not doing 5 or not getting to 8 isn't a failure. As long as you've gotten more than 2 or 3, you've sort of done it successfully. It's just about getting that first initial gut reaction out of your head and making space for different ideas.
For sure. That also leads on to our final section. Thanks, Noah, to talk about the so what of all of this.
So what? Yeah. So what? That's what is what I'm going to say a lot. So that's what, number 1. Heat density, like the heat and density maps, can help you establish elemental relationships. I like this. It makes my brain happy. I quite often will take screens and draw sort of 90-degree lines, straight lines between all of them, or all of the elements, just to see how they overlap, where their relationships are, how weighted the screen is, because UX is fundamentally about relationships. How elements on screen relate to each other and what that tells us about those elements and what they are and how important they are. It also helps you establish a lot of these things at a glance. Doing exercises like this can make it clear how weighted your screen might be, and if anything is left sort of floating out in the void on its own, which might not necessarily be a bad thing, but it's important to know what is and why it might be. It's also like a weighted screen is also not necessarily a bad thing, depending on the purpose. It's an information gathering tool, and then you sort of can work out why it is the way it is, and if it needs to be that way. It can also help you establish a hierarchy, especially visually, which is vital for sharing and getting across all kinds of information. Again, it's not an exercise in what you've done wrong. It's more of an observational exercise that can maybe help you think a little bit more about why you've presented things the way that you have, and if things that are related don't seem as related as they could be. And then another one, that's what players, users, audience. Specifically about personas. I really like this example from the Ministry of Justice, not necessarily in this context, but I like the core idea, especially for video games. personas can be contentious. Generally, if you ask someone who their game is for, they might be tempted to tell you everyone, but that's a lie. We know that games are for everyone, but every individual game is not for everyone. I don't think that's necessarily a controversial statement, but sometimes if you're very close to something, it can be hard to sort of frame that as a positive thing. So who is your game for? How do they play? How do they engage with the funny toys you put in front of them? And do you cater to one over the other? You probably do. And understanding your personas can help inform things like your core gameplay loops and the ways you're going to reward them and how often. Know your audience the best you can. There are a lot of people and they will all play your game, and it's important to understand how they want to interact with it, especially if you want them, that specific group of people, to play your game. And then number 3 of that's what? Intention, intention, intention. Not all video games are made equal. In the same way, not all personas will engage in a game in an equal way. Games aren't equal in their stylistic choices, their information density, and not in what their players will put up with. Soulsborne menus are about as complex and information dense as the entire playstyle is hostile. And it works because that's what you expect. Something being obtuse can be a choice if if Elden Ring or any Soulsborne game is hard to understand and takes learning and time to get really good at. You can sort of expect the same thing from understanding or the stats and how they impact your builds. The important thing is that you're making specific choices and intentional decisions, and the intended response is then being recorded among the audience you want that response from. At some point, you can disregard certain opinions. People who don't like Elden Ring for its dense menus and stats-heavy screens were never going to like Elden Ring for its challenging gameplay that required you to engage with those things in order to get the most out of it, in order to really push your ability as the Tarnished. Whereas, on the other hand, my mum, when she would come home from work and popped on Beehive Bedlam from Sky Games, she was never going to choose to pick up Elden Ring in its place, though I would have absolutely loved that. So that's what UX is expensive, time consuming, and worth it. Fixing UX in the 11th hour is costly, is what I mean by this. And it's also ineffective. Usually it also means annoying the god out of your existing players if you're making changes to a game that is already live. Because these changes, impact and break the patterns they've already worked to establish, even if they're not very effective. And the inconsistency between screens, if you're rolling them out a little bits at a time, can cause frustration as well. A well-designed system of behaviors and patterns will solve your problems before they really even come up. And in the event that you add content on later, it can help provide a really good foundation for new screens and just new interactions, and that saves you money. I firefought on UX in late stage projects, and it just causes frustration across the whole board. You step on people's toes. It's also a job that can never really be finished or implemented in good time. When you're coming down to sort of the few months and weeks up into release, you don't have time to just the people have just finished implementing a whole new inventory menu. What do you mean they have to do it again? It causes more bugs to crop up, and then you're wasting time bug fixing on things that you've technically already fixed. It becomes an exponential time sink that you wouldn't have if you just thought about it at the start. Investing in UX early will save you time, money, and stress. And sometimes we even get ahead of your deadlines, working on things way in advance so that everyone has what they need exactly when they need it. We talk a lot about UX in video games, but quite often we don't see it practiced in maybe a way a lot of us UXers would really like to, especially if we've come from a product design background where that stuff is a science. It's really heavily invested in, and the pipelines are really strong. So I guess if anything, you take away from this is to invest in your UX because it just makes sense.
For sure. And that wraps up our talk. Here's the resource list and reading list that we mentioned right at the beginning. So if you want to read a bit more about any of the topics we've talked about today, you feel free to go to these links and resources. So the first one talks about the 10 usability heuristics by the Nielsen Norman Group. Then the next one is Systems Thinking by the Interaction Design Foundation. Then a How Might We toolkit to help you form those How Might We statements by Design Kit. And then the Game UI database by Ed Coates, which includes a lot of great resources and screenshots of UI UX in games.
Yeah. Microsoft also has an absolutely huge collection of articles on designing a user interface. Obviously, it's very Microsoft leanings in terms of the sort of platforms that they're talking about, but they also have a lot of accessibility guidelines as well. There's a lot of different contributors on there. It's well worth a time sink. And then we have some tried and true books. Don't Make Me Think and Rocket Surgery Made Easy by the amazing Stephen Krug. And the user experience team of one for our lone fighters out there. And then the design of everyday things. I'm very much a proponent of design as a big field, so physical design and ergonomics, just understanding how people, want to use things and engage with them, and it is sort of good knowledge to have, even if you're talking about digital design. And then we would be remiss to include The Gamer's Brain by Celia Hodent, who actually rewrote, I think, the usability heuristics specifically for games. You probably know her name already.
Yeah, and that's it. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for listening to our talk. And yeah, any questions?
Awesome. Hi. It's weird when I can't see anyone. So, hello. I'm assuming people here. I'm waving at you. I'm gonna imagine you're waving back. So yeah, thank you for listening to me and Sarah, and for making the time, whether it's now or in the future, presuming the Q&A is going to be on the recording for the future. But yeah, we've got just a couple of questions. I think I'm going to answer the first one, and Sarah, you'll do the second one. Yeah. So we've got a sort of beefy question here from, I believe it says Bex Richards. So with the seemingly contradictory situation of A, players wanting to purchase a well-crafted creative encounter, and B, not feeling like their individual journey is a carefully curated product, how do you balance creating too homogenous or familiar an experience with the spontaneity a player wants to feel? Now, this is something you could talk about a lot. And unfortunately, I think for the sake of brevity, the very short answer is intention. It depends on what you want out of, as a creative, as someone making something for someone, what you want them to experience more so than what they want to experience. It's a little bit difficult, but it comes down to knowing that audience. And a carefully created product isn't necessarily about something that is hitting all the beats people are expecting, but rather utilizing experiences, patterns, and behaviors that they already know when it's relevant to use them. It's a little bit of a give and take, and games aren't made equal in sense of whether their gameplay loop is really tight or if it's something that's a little more player driven. It really depends. but either way, you're weighing up what your intention is versus what your user wants to experience or what's going to make their life easier. So it genuinely sort of just comes down to how you want something to be experienced, what you want your players to get out of that, and then assessing where you want to use familiarity and when you don't. But it's a really good question, and it's the kind of question I would love to talk about a lot based on like if you have any particular examples, I would love to go into that. But much like everything in UX, I think it comes down to pure intention. I don't know, Sarah, if you have anything you would like to add to that or disagree. Feel free to disagree if you do.
No, I agree. I think for games, the lines are a bit more blurred. Like for product design, of course, we want to make it super easy. If we use the same patterns, it's fine. But for games, I understand that you want to be unique, you want to stand out, you want to make sure that the experience feels like its own and it doesn't copy other games, for example. So I think like what Noah says, it's like a give and take. Having to think about what patterns can you take to make your game or experience easy and understandable, but what new things potentially could you put in to make it feel fresh? For games, it's a lot more difficult to navigate.
Yeah, definitely. Product design and product UX is a science mostly because it has a singular intention, whereas games, that is not the case. Unless you're talking about sort of free to play experiences or live service games where ultimately there is a sort of similar product essence of continual purchasing, and but that is no. Again, that's I could sit here and talk for a while, but yeah, the cop-out answer is it depends on the particular circumstances.
Cool. Should we move on to the next question from Dom? So when in a project should UX be included from? Concept, prototype, or pre-production? I want to say from the very beginning, as early as possible, just because even in the concept stage, you might not think UX is needed because there's no screens per se, but UX can help you in so many other aspects besides wireframing. Like research, for example. What's out there, like how can you direct your concept to be user friendly and things like that. Do you want to add on to that, Noah?
Yeah, it can be down to things like market fit, and determining sort of those very early stage stuff. But also, like I think as Sarah talked about in the talk, when you have examples like alien isolation of how other physical mechanics are UX and how maybe you can, maybe there are some things you're imagining as screens that don't have to be, and that is a very UX, focused sort of resolution, so early, definitely I agree, but yeah, UX can be used for a whole swathe of things, from general concept to business decisions.
Yeah, and I guess also accessibility, like UX will help you kind of identify potential points in your concept, even like that might, not make it as accessible as it could be. So it's really good to have UX insight from the beginning. Yeah, I think that's all the questions we have. I guess that's
Yeah, I mean, I always know if you have my email DMs or whatever, I love talking about this stuff. So if you remember my name and my okay face, you can come and find me whenever, and I love to talk about this stuff. So yeah, no, my virtual door is always open for talking about UX.
Same as me. Feel free to message either myself or Noah if you have any other questions, more specific ones, or like if you want like ask very specific questions, we're happy to answer those as well.
Yeah, thank you again to everyone who had time to come and listen to us today.
Yep.
From the
Thanks so
past
much.
and present.
Yeah.